What's up, guys, and welcome back to the shop. Hey, we're here at Hook One Bait and Tackle, back in the studio, and we're here for another segment of Shop Talk. Obviously, as you can tell, I've got a mess of baits in front of me, and that's what we're here to talk about. So if you tuned into our last segment, you'll know that we talked a little bit about jigs, all sorts of jigs. Swim jigs, vertical jigging jigs, round balls, walleye style, light jigs, short shank jigs. We talked basically on a lot of ways to tune in your presentation when you're jigging. That's kind of what we're going to roll into on this segment here, and we're going to talk a lot about jigging baits. So not necessarily the jig in the plastic that so many people, especially around here, are accustomed to, but a lot of jigging baits, because there's a lot of baits on the market that are weighted baits designed to get down to the bottom where those walleyes are, that you don't have to run a plastic or anything like that on them. So we've got a few different options here. A lot of them are from our friends over at Rapala and our friends over at Northland Tackle. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes these baits so effective, especially like right now we're in the middle of July, and a lot of these baits can be super effective in the summer because they have a very aggressive presentation. But a lot of these baits also double as a really good winter bait. A lot of these baits you'll see that we use ice fishing or early in the spring to draw those fish. And again, it's because of their aggressive presentation, something that you can't mimic with, say, a jig in a plastic. So we'll kind of dive right in with one of my favorite jigging baits of all time, really. Of all time, really. And that is this little fella right here, known as the Jigging Wrap. So this is the Jigging Wrap from Rapala. This is what it looks like in the package. And this one here is the 5/8 ounce size. So we've got 5/8 ounce, and you also have 7/8 ounce. The 7/8 ounce is about 3.5. This is right around 3 inches. I like a little bit heavier weight, again, because we're dealing with current over here. A majority of the time, 99% of the time, we're dealing with current. And so I like a little bit heavier of a jig to help us get down to the bottom. Now, if you look at this bait here, you'll see there's a hook on the back, a hook on the front, and then the treble here. A little secret that I like to do, I've just found a lot of success with it, and I just love to cut this front hook off. Just get rid of it completely. When I use this bait ice fishing, which is very rare, but when I use this bait ice fishing, a lot of the times I notice that I'll get this front lip caught right on the ice, or this front lip if I'm fishing, if I'm fishing out on the open water, I notice a lot of times this will get hung up in the weeds, or this will get hung up in the rocks if I'm fishing around logs. So a lot of the times this does more harm than good. Even though walleye a lot of the times eat their bait in the front of their bait, I just noticed I have a lot more success with the back hook and just the treble hook. So just a little secret, take it up if you want, don't if you don't want to. Let us know in the comments what you like to do to kind of, tweak your baits a little bit to make them more effective. But this bait here is what's known as a glide bait. So, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but you can see this little plastic fin back here on the tail. That's what gives this bait all the action. So the reason that I like this bait so much is you can fish it very slow, cast it out, or vertical jig it, and kind of just fish it real slow. But this bait is meant to be fished real fast. If you give this bait a very good jerk, a real stiff jig, a lot of the times you're going to notice that this bait just darts off to the side and then it swings back around and falls back into the picture. A lot of the times that's what's going to trigger the walleye to strike. He's not necessarily eating it because he's hungry. It's more of a reaction strike. There's food in his face and he's got to make a decision right now. Is he going to eat the bait or is he going to let it go? This is a killer for us out in the channels, like out towards Lake St. Clair. We do really well with them in the river here. I actually really love pitching these and casting these into shallow water first thing in the morning, last thing at night, when those fish are up shallow. So if you haven't, guys, I highly suggest checking out the Jigging Wrap. Obviously, we've got them here at the store. You can find them online. But it's a very, very good bait. A lot of uses for it. Like I said, you can use it ice fishing. You can use it early in the spring and fish it real slow. This time of the year, I love power fishing them in the summer. I love aggressively ripping them and getting those strikes on this bait. So check out the Jigging Wrap. Not a bad bait. We'll stay with Rapala and we'll kind of keep rolling with the same presentation. A lot of you guys have seen this bait before, and this here's their Rip and Wrap. Now, the Rip and Wrap I've noticed is a lot popular in those western walleye fisheries. You notice them a lot over in Green Bay, a lot over in Minnesota, and not a lot of guys use this bait around here. Now, For vertical jigging, this isn't necessarily the best bait. As you can tell, it's a pretty wide bait. There's a lot of room for the current to grab and whoosh this bait downstream. Not to say that we haven't caught fish vertical on this, but this is a bait that I love doing what I just mentioned with the Jigging Wrap. I love pitching this bait up shallow, first thing in the morning, last thing at night. I love taking this bait out to the lake. Now, there's a few reasons that I like this bait so much. One, it gets down to the bottom quick. The way it's shaped, you can see it comes down to a V point here, and it gets down to the bottom quick. I really like that. I like knowing that I'm down there on the bottom and knowing that I'm there in the strike zone. Another reason that I really like this bait is if you listen, it's got a really loud rattle to it. So when you're presenting this bait, and whether you're straight reeling it or you're kind of jigging it back, it's gonna rattle side to side, similar to something like this. It'll go side to side, and it makes a lot of noise. Now, a bait like this is another one that is very good. You can fish this bait very aggressively in the summer months and get a lot of reaction strikes from those fish. But this bait has made a lot of money and has made its name, especially over in the Green Bay system, because you can bomb these things out. You can get very long casts on these things and get this bait way away from the boat. So in a system like ours with really clean water, it's not a bad idea to try something like this. Get that bait way away from the boat and slowly bring that presentation back, or aggressively, depending when you're fishing it. But you can bring that bait back to you and work it a lot of different ways. Like I said, you can kind of straight retrieve it. I suggest kind of jigging it back. You let it go down to the bottom and pop it back. That's where I have a lot of my best luck. But definitely check it out. Like I said, guys, this is the Rip and Wrap. This is a size 6. This is probably the most popular size. We do have some of those bigger ones that get into the ounce range. There might even be one in front of me. I don't really know. So moving on, we're gonna talk a little bit about a bait that mimics similar to what a Rip and Wrap does, minus the rattle. And that's this little fella right here, the blade bait. The blade bait is a very popular bait in any walleye fishery. Again, it's very versatile. Fish it in cold water, fish it in the summer. Now, a lot of times, blade bait is a bait that should be fished on a sand flat or somewhere where there's not a lot of snags. If you look at this bait here, you'll notice that there's 2 pretty good size hooks on there. So those hooks are gonna catch anything that you put that bait through. You're gonna hook onto logs, you're gonna hook onto grass, you're gonna hook into rocks. So that's why a lot of these times I like fishing this on a sand flat, or if I can find a spot early in the spring, especially if you can find a spot that's not so covered, whether it's covered in weeds or logs like we mentioned, or rocks. And then the blade bait is a very good bait that we can fish vertical. Now, just because of the way it's shaped and the way that it's weighted, it gets down to the bottom. The current doesn't grab it quite like it does a Rip and Wrap. So the blade bait is a very good bait that you can fish vertical. You can pitch it, you can cast it. Definitely a real nice bait to use. Also a really good smallmouth producer. Not a lot of guys know the plain silver color, just straight silver, a silver buddy, is a very good bait that catches a lot of smallmouth, but it's a very good walleye bait, very good producer. Moving over to a bait that's a little bit different. Now, this is something that looks a little bit different, but is gaining traction extremely fast. A lot of guys have been using this bait, whether you're vertical jigging it or casting it, tipping it with a night crawler, tipping it with a minnow. A lot of guys have been running this bait. It's been a very good bait and a very popular bait for good reason. And that's this little fella here. That's the Jigging Spoon. This here is a buckshot spoon from Northland Tackle. The reason I like these buckshot spoons is, again, and I don't know if you'll be able to hear this one. Not really. But this here's the buckshot rattle spoon. It's actually got a rattle chamber right back here, and there's a couple little rattles in there that give this bait a little bit of noise. Now, these are very good baits. I know a lot of you guys that do ice fish are looking at these saying, hey, I've used something like this before. Guys, when you can get into the 3/4, half, even up to an ounce size, the Jigging Spoon can be a very, very good bait. So again, you can fish this vertical. I actually really like fishing these vertical more than I like pitching or casting them. I've seen a lot of guys, especially now with forward-facing sonar, you can make it to where you can kind of put this thing right on the money. So a lot of guys will cast it. The way this thing is weighted, you could probably cast this thing a mile. So I know a lot of guys will cast it and kind of sharpshoot fish. Now, in the fishery that we're in the system that we're in, especially with all that current, it's a lot easier to fish these baits vertical. But what I like about these is the different type of movement that you get than really any of these other baits that are even up here. So when you aggressively jig this bait, it's gonna dart off to one of the sides because of its teardrop shape. But when you let this thing go and you give it slack line, what this bait wants to do is lay down flat and flutter down. So it'll go side to side, try not to drop it here. It'll go side to side and flutter down. And a lot of times on that flutter down is when a fish will come up and grab it. You'll actually notice a bow in your line, or your line will jump. Now when that happens, a lot of the times that means you have a fish on. So a lot of the times anglers aren't used to fishing a bait like this or used to watching for those signs. And so a lot of the times they'll use a bait like this, they'll get bit and they'll have no idea. And they'll think that it's not a good bait or it's not a productive bait. A lot of the times it is a productive bait and it is a very good bait, but you have to notice those subtle bites. Again, I like using these in the 1/2 and 3/4 ounce size. You can go up to an ounce, even 1.5 ounces. I mean, they make really big ones for jigging kings. We even have 2 and 3 ounce spoons in here. But those are kind of more for like salmon and lake trout. I really like the 1/2, 3/4, even 1 ounce on these jigging spoons. But once the summer rolls around, especially when the bites, like I said, down in the channels and in those spaces where you can get into deeper water that's got some weed beds on the outside, you can really hug those weed beds. This is a super versatile bait, guys. So please, I know I keep saying a lot of these baits are versatile, but it's because you can use these things a lot of ways. And you guys aren't dumb, I'm not dumb. I know the way fishing is going. I know it's getting expensive, so use these things to your advantage as much as you can. Check out the spoons, I know you won't regret it. And kind of the last bait here in our series, or here in our little segment, is a hair jig. Now again, the hair jig, I kind of use it or I use the term similar to I do a rip and wrap, but it's a lot of those western fisheries, right to the west of us. A lot of guys over in Green Bay, a lot of guys in Wisconsin, the Dakotas on those reservoir systems, a lot of guys like using hair jigs. Over here, it's not so common. We don't see a lot of hair jigs or bucktail jigs over here. I'm not quite sure the reason, because a lot of the times this hair here, especially if you can get some flash in it, like some of these patterns here, if you can get some silver flash into it, a lot of these baits you can run exactly like in a jig in a plastic, but without the plastic. This hair will sort of mimic the plastic. Now, I've had times where I've buried a minnow in this here so I can run kind of like a live bait with it. I don't usually run a plastic on this bait. I just run this, just run the hair. And a lot of times what happens is when you pause the hair jig, that bucktail will kind of puff up behind it. It'll give it that bigger presentation. And then as soon as you either start to reel or you jig, it slicks back down and it looks like a natural little bait fish. A lot of the times that little presentation difference between that puffed up skirt and then sliding back down to a bait fish presentation is really good. A lot of times that's what's gonna trigger these fish to bite. Now, you're gonna notice a lot of different sizes and a lot of different colors of these bucktails and hair jigs, because like I said, a lot of guys can even hand tie them. But this is a very, very good bait to use. It's something different, like we said, than using a traditional jig in plastic, because what we notice in the shop, guys, is a lot of guys coming through and they're not having success with their jigs and plastics, not as much as they'd like to have, or we're getting later in the year when those fish get a little finicky. And that's when I recommend kind of switching it up. That's when you're going to want to use some of these different jigging baits, something that's going to get down to the bottom, get in the strike zone, because a lot of times it's not the lack of fish. A lot of times the fish are there, they're just not biting. So you got to kind of switch up your presentation. If it's not biting the jig in the Pimp Daddy Lunker City, there's other baits to use. I get it that they're really good baits. I know they produce really well, especially end of April, May, when that run is full-fledged. But a lot of the times in the early spring and then later in the summer, when that main migration's not running, you can switch up your baits a little bit. You can try some different techniques. You can get some color patterns, say like this yellow perch, or I call this the old huff and puff here. But you can switch up. You'll notice a lot of these baits have different patterns that you can't really get on a plastic. Rapala's done a really good job of coming out with a lot of new baits. Northland does a really good job with their foil, with the foil tape on their baits. So check it out, guys. Do some research on your own. Obviously, take this video into account. We'd love to do a video where we get out on the water and actually test these baits and you can see the application where they're actually used. If you've been out on a charter with me, then you've probably used some of these baits. I really like using these baits in the summer. Instead of pulling spinners and pulling worms and just sitting there with rods in the rod holder. I love a rod in my hand. I like to get out and jig, whether it's vertical, whether I'm casting, whether I'm pitching jigs, whatever the situation is. And these baits really help me switch it up. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this segment. I hope it helped out. I hope it kind of gets the brain churning a little bit, makes you want to get out and try something a little different. Obviously, if you need any of this stuff, come visit us in the store. If you have any questions, come visit us in the store. If you can't come visit us in the store, feel free to email us, Facebook message us, message us on our website. You can head over to www.hookonebaitandtackle.com. You can sign up for our newsletter, where we're coming out with blogs and kind of more written information on this stuff. But there's a lot of ways to get to us. There's a lot of ways to find out what we're doing. We've got the Hook One pod. You've probably seen a couple episodes on YouTube. We've only got one on there. We've got one coming out this week. But we have 40 episodes that are over on podcasts, or on podcasts, over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. So head over there. You can listen to a lot of information. We've had some guests on the show over there, so you can head over there and kind of check out what we're doing. But we're not hard to find. Hook One Bait and Tackle on Twitter, at Hook One on Instagram, at Hook One on TikTok. Guys, thank you so much for the support. It would be awesome if you could like this video, share this video, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's just a quick click. Just head down to the bottom of this video, quick click to subscribe. That means the world to us. We're looking to hit the ground running, and we can't thank you guys enough for all the support. Tight lines.